I moved the chair this morning, not far, 6 inches, maybe 8, from where I've had it since October, angled toward the table to facing the window directly, south facing. That's all, 6 inches. It took me 47 years to figure out where I wanted to sit. The stove went low overnight again, 3rd time this week. There's a technique to banking it, logs positioned in a specific way before bed, dense toward the back, a channel of air at the front. And if you get it right, it holds until 4 in the morning without going cold. I've gotten it right perhaps 2/3 of the time since I arrived. The other third, I wake to a stone house that has dropped to 8 degrees, and I rebuild it from ash with numb fingers in the dark. I chaired the Blue Ridge Symphony annual benefit for 14 consecutive years. I grew it from $40,000 to $380,000. I managed a 7-bedroom estate and a beach house, and 4 children's education and social calendars, and the Crane family Christmas for 31 consecutive years. 29 people at peak, 3 days. I never once hired help. I cannot reliably keep a wood stove burning through a mountain night. I find that funny, genuinely. I'm still working on the stove. The Wedgwood cup is on the shelf above the stove, pale blue, gold rim, part of a 12-piece set, wedding gift, 1978. I left the other 11 in Charlottesville the week before the house closed, put them in a box, and gave them to the Episcopal Church resale shop, along with the silver, the linen tablecloths, the good crystal, 40 years of serving dishes I had acquired for other people's pleasure, and the seating chart files. I kept the cup. I'm not sure I can explain why exactly. It isn't sentiment, or not only that. I use it every morning. Strong tea, boiled on the stove. No milk, because there isn't always milk, and I've stopped arranging my habits around what might not be there. The cup holds heat well. The thin bone china, you can see light through it if you hold it up to the window. It holds heat better than you'd expect something that fragile to hold anything. Alois's granddaughter came by in November with eggs from the farm. She saw the cup on the rough stone shelf and paused. She's 23, I think, maybe 24, and she has the look of someone who was raised to notice the cost of things. She didn't say anything, neither did I. She set down the eggs and left. The cup stays. Let me explain the seating arrangement, not as a metaphor, not yet, just as what it actually was. A formal dinner table for 20 or 24 people is a 3-dimensional problem. You are managing proximity. You are managing the conversation that will happen between each pair of people. The history that exists between every person in the room. Because in 40 years of Charlottesville social life, everyone had history with everyone. And the history was not always clean. You cannot seat the ex-wife 2 chairs from the second wife. This is obvious. Less obvious, you cannot seat them on opposite ends of the same side, because then they spend the evening in peripheral awareness of each other, a worse kind of proximity. You put one at each end of the table, with enough people between them that the geometry feels like coincidence. Robert's brother-in-law who drank. You placed him on the far end of the dining room, angled toward the garden view, with the kind of company that would occupy him pleasantly and put distance between him and the bar in the library. Not conspicuously far, just far enough. Margaret Ashby came to our Christmas every year for 30 years. She had a hip replacement in 2004 that never fully healed, and she needed the armless chair, the one without the carved mahogany sides. And she needed to be within a reasonable distance of the door to the hallway. She would have died before asking to be excused in a way that drew attention. I knew this. I placed her accordingly. I placed her every year. And there was a woman, I won't say her name, who I had suspected since roughly 2003 of being quietly, possibly without even fully acknowledging it herself, in love with my husband. She was a colleague's wife. She came 3 or 4 times a year to various events. She was warm and intelligent, and entirely appropriate in every observable way. I seated her at the far end of the table, with the best view of the south garden, and the company of a retired federal judge, who was a wonderful conversationalist, and who would occupy her attention completely. None of this was written down. I kept it in my head. I kept all of it in my head. The histories, the sensitivities, the allergies, the bad knees, the difficult divorces, the professional rivalries, the social debts, the complicated affections. I walked into a room full of people and arranged them in the configuration that would generate the least friction and the most ease. And I did this for 40 years, and nobody noticed the work, because the work was invisible when it was done correctly. The measure of a perfect seating arrangement is that everyone leaves the table feeling as though they happen to be placed beside someone interesting. That was the arrangement. I stopped reading novels in 1989. I'm trying to describe what it actually costs, the thing I did, and I want to be precise about this, because imprecision here would be dishonest. It isn't sacrifice. I dislike that word. It implies a transaction, a conscious exchange, and what happened was nothing that deliberate. What happened was gradual, the way things go gradually until they're gone. I had read steadily until 1989. I'd gone to UVA on the strength of it, English literature, 1972 to 1976, and I'd loved it genuinely. Not because it was the correct thing to love, because novels held a whole life at a distance where you could see the shape of it. I loved that, the shape of things. In 1989 I stopped. There was simply no time, and reading felt self-indulgent in the way that any activity purely for me felt self-indulgent, because there was always something that needed attention. The children's school calendars, Robert's partner's dinner, the symphony gala committee seating, the volunteer roster for the hospital foundation board, and underneath all of it, continuously, the management of a household that ran well because someone was managing it, and that someone had decided, without quite deciding, that her own preferences were a secondary concern. The reading stopped. The opinions followed. I want to be precise about this too. I didn't form opinions and suppress them. I stopped forming them. Not about the things that weren't mine to manage. I had no strong views on tax policy or foreign affairs, or anything that didn't require me to act. The consulting process stopped, quietly, and eventually the capacity for the thing quietly left too. Like a muscle. You don't notice it going, you notice it gone. I formed excellent opinions in service of other people's requirements, about schools, caterers, contractors, specialists, about people, their needs, their sensitivities, the geometry of placing them in a room together. I was a very sophisticated instrument for attending to other people's needs. My own needs I had not consulted in some time. Robert had Parkinson's. The diagnosis came in 2017. He was 63. He had been slowing for a year before that, a tremor in the left hand that he attributed to fatigue, a rigidity in the mornings that he dismissed as age. Robert dismissed things he preferred not to address. He was a very good attorney, which requires the ability to evaluate what serves your case and set aside what doesn't. And he brought this to his own medical situation with the thoroughness of someone who has practiced it for decades. I spent the next 4 years managing it. Medications, 2 neurologists in Baltimore, a specialist at Penn, the local physician who coordinated everything and who I briefed monthly on changes, the pharmacy rotation, the dosage windows, because with Parkinson's, the timing of medication matters in a way that most diseases don't. There is a window when the drug is working and a window when it isn't. And in the window when it isn't, a man who was a named partner at a Richmond law firm could not hold a pen steadily or button his own shirt. And he knew this, and I managed the knowledge of it in the way I managed everything, without making it visible. The home nurses I vetted myself. I interviewed 12 over 4 years and hired 3. What I was looking for, what is genuinely difficult to find, is someone who can manage a man's dignity in rooms where he can no longer manage it himself. The hands that won't cooperate. The body that becomes unreliable in specific and private ways. Someone who can be present in those rooms without making the person feel observed. I found 3 such people. It required considerable discernment. What nobody tells you about this kind of caregiving, or rather what I did not allow myself to know, because I suspect it would have been told to me had I sought out the communities of people who know it, is that you grieve the person before the person is gone. You watch the competence leave, the specific competencies that were the architecture of who they were, and you grieve each one in real time while maintaining the household, the children, the appointments, the dignity management, the medication schedule. It's a grief that runs underneath everything else, like the low current of a river you're standing in. And then the person dies, and people look at you, kindly, genuinely kindly, and say you've been grieving for 4 years already, as if the anticipatory grief and the actual grief were the same grief, and you've exhausted your allocation of it. They are not the same grief. Robert died on October 14th, 2021. I managed the memorial, the wake, the reception at the house, the probate, the notification letters, the coordination of grief for 4 adult children in 3 time zones, and 9 grandchildren who needed different things from me depending on their ages. I did not collapse. I organized. I was, as always, the last person still in the room, and the first one there the next morning. The organizing was what I had. I was very good at it. That was the arrangement. March 2022, an email. My son William, the oldest, corporate law in Richmond, a version of his father's career with somewhat better work-life balance, sent an email to his 3 siblings regarding, as he put it, the house and mum's situation. I was carbon copied, not addressed, carbon copied. The distinction matters to me still, though I understand it may not matter to anyone else. CC'd is for people who need the information. Addressed is for people whose response you want. The thread had 11 replies before I saw it. They had been discussing logistics, timeline for selling the house, looking at some options before the summer, the phrase recurring in the way deadlines recur when the people setting them are confident they won't be questioned. Patricia, she's the youngest, an art director in New York, the one I always seated next to guests who needed someone charming and contemporary, had written 3 replies. She'd researched interim options. She'd mentioned a mountain property near Charlottesville. She'd done the work carefully and with good intentions. The house she was describing as a logistical problem to be resolved was the house where I had raised 4 children, cooked 29 people for Christmas 31 times, where Robert's medication binders were still in the study, and the last home nurse's emergency contact was still on the kitchen bulletin board. I wrote back, "I'm fine, I'll let you know if I need anything." They accepted this. The thread ended. And what I understood, sitting at the kitchen table with 11 replies open on my screen, that same table where I had eaten 16,000 meals in service of other people, where I had not once sat down before everyone else was settled and served. What I understood was that I had been managed. Not maliciously, not even thoughtlessly, exactly. My children love me. They love me in the way that people love a function they have depended on, warmly, genuinely, and with a kind of inattention to the interior life of the function itself. The function had been running so smoothly for so long that the people it served had forgotten that the function had preferences. That she had once sat in a library at Uva reading George Eliot until 2 in the morning because she couldn't stop. I came to Switzerland because Robert had always said he wanted to see the Alps. I want to be precise about this because it would be easy to make it more symbolic than it is. We were supposed to come for our 35th anniversary in 2013. Then there was always something. The Parkinson's assessment in 2017, the hospice coordination in 2021, and before all of that, simply the 35 years of there always being something. We never went. I rented a car in Zurich in July 2022. No itinerary. I drove east. In the Münstertal, that's what the valley is called in Romansh, which is the language spoken in this part of Switzerland, and which I do not speak, the road narrowed and the mountains pressed in on both sides, and the valley folded around itself in a way that felt like privacy. And I stopped because there was a farmhouse with a hand-lettered sign in the yard, and the road didn't obviously continue further. I speak no Romansh, no German, no Italian. Alois, the farmer who owns this place, he's 78, I think, although I'm estimating, speaks no English. We conducted the rental agreement through his granddaughter Lena on speakerphone, standing in his kitchen with a tractor idling somewhere in the yard. She translated my questions and his answers with patience and without editorializing. The monthly amount was reasonable. The house has 3 rooms, a cast-iron stove, and a south-facing window. I said yes. I have been here since. The Benedictine Convent of St. John is visible from my kitchen window. Founded 775 AD, I looked it up eventually, once I'd found reliable internet at the village cooperative. It contains the most complete cycle of Carolingian-era frescoes in existence. UNESCO World Heritage since 1983. I can see the tower from where I stand to boil the tea, and in the early morning, before the sun comes over the eastern ridge, the stone looks silver. At 6 o'clock every morning the bells ring. I need to explain this properly. The bells ring because it is 6 o'clock. They rang before I arrived. They will ring after I leave. They have no relationship to whether I am having a good morning or a difficult one, to whether the stove banked correctly, to whether I am thinking about the email thread or the buttermilk pie recipe, or the 31 Christmas dinners, or the 4 years of medication binders. They are the first sound in my adult life that has no relationship to me. I arranged 47 years of human life around a table. I knew everyone's comfort radius to the inch. I knew who needed to face the window and who couldn't bear the draught from the west side of the dining room. I knew who needed to be near the door, who needed distance from the bar, who would forgive a tedious neighbour on the left if the neighbour on the right was sufficiently interesting. I seated 9 grandchildren, adjusting for ages, for the particular chaos a 4-year-old introduces to a formal arrangement. 4 children, 2 ex-spouses of Robert's law partners, who both attended the same charity events and required careful geometry. 3 partners Robert needed to impress on separate occasions, and 1 woman I had suspected for years of being quietly in love with my husband, whom I seated with the best company and the best view, and who left the table saying what a lovely evening it had been. I never once put myself where I wanted to sit. I'm not sure I knew where that was. You spend 47 years arranging things for other people, and you develop an extraordinary sensitivity to their needs, and a corresponding blindness to your own. Not because you suppress your own, that implies a resistance, a push against something. What happened was simpler. I stopped consulting my own preferences. The consulting stopped, and eventually the machinery that generates preferences ran more and more quietly, and I mistook the quiet for contentment. It is easy to mistake quiet for contentment when you're very busy. When the thread appeared on my screen, 11 replies, my own house referred to as a logistical problem, my situation something to be resolved, I understood something that I had not permitted myself to understand before. Not that I was unloved. I was genuinely loved. I was loved the way that people love a function they have relied on without examining too closely, warmly, without ill intent, with a very incomplete idea of the interior life of the thing they love. That is not a small distinction. The convent bells rang this morning at 6. I was already up. Old habit. I have always been first up, first into the kitchen, first into the day, before anyone else required anything from it. I'd lit the stove and the water was heating. I was standing at the south window with the Wedgwood cup held in both hands, just holding the warmth of it, not drinking yet, watching the light begin to change on the convent tower. Then I moved the chair. 6 inches. 8. I set it directly facing the window, and I sat down. The sun in this valley comes over the eastern peaks around 9 in the morning. The mountains hold the shadow for hours, which you don't expect. The altitude makes the light behave differently. And when it finally cleared the ridge, it came in long and low, and through the south-facing glass, and I sat in it without doing anything at all. The convent tower was pale gold. The river in the valley floor caught it and threw it back. Alois's tractor started up in the far field, and I could hear it from inside the house, and I found that reassuring in a way I cannot entirely explain. Nobody needed anything. Last Tuesday I sat there for an hour. The Tuesday before I sat for 40 minutes, and then the cooperative opened and I had shopping to do. This morning, however long it was, I've stopped tracking time in the way I used to track it, which was as a resource to be allocated. I sat until I was ready to get up. For 47 years, I placed everyone else at the table first. I seated 9 grandchildren, 4 children, all the complicated histories, all the careful geometries of who could sit where. I seated the woman who may have loved my husband, and I never put it in the arrangement because the arrangement wasn't mine to disturb. I put myself last. I put myself wherever was left. Out here there is 1 chair. I put it wherever I want. That is the arrangement. The Wedgwood cup is on the shelf. The stove is holding this morning. I got it right. The bells have already rung. The tractor is somewhere in the valley. I moved the chair 6 inches and sat in the window light for the first time in 47 years without anyone needing anything from me. I'll probably sit there again tomorrow.